They say blind dates are awkward, but no one warns you about the moment when your date walks in, sees your face, and starts crying in front of everyone. That's exactly what happened to Evan Mercer, a single dad who thought he'd survived the worst life could throw at him until the copper-haired woman in the wheelchair locked eyes with him and whispered, "No, not again." What she said next didn't just break his heart, it shattered everything he thought he knew about second chances, trust, and what it really means to fall in love. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey has traveled. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and overpriced espresso, the kind of place where people pretended to work on screenplays while nursing a single latte for 3 hours. Evan Mercer stood just inside the doorway, his shoulders hunched against the March cold that had followed him through the glass door, and wondered, not for the first time that evening, why he'd let his sister talk him into this. "It's been 2 years, Ev," Rachel had said, her voice equal parts bossy and heartbroken. "Theo needs to see you smile again." Hell, I need to see you smile again. Evan had almost hung up on her. Almost. But Rachel had played dirty, mentioning how their mom would have wanted this, how life was too short, how he deserved happiness. All the greatest hits. So here he stood, in a Boulder cafe at 7:30 on a Thursday night, waiting for a woman whose name he couldn't quite remember, and whose face he wouldn't recognize. The cafe was small, intimate in that uncomfortable way that made every conversation feel like a performance. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs hanging like lonely stars, mismatched furniture that was probably supposed to feel quirky but just looked exhausted. A couple in the corner was having an intense whispered argument. A college kid with purple hair was crying softly over a biology textbook. The barista, a young guy with a man bun and forearm tattoos, kept shooting Evan sympathetic looks, as if he could smell the desperation radiating off him in waves. Evan checked his phone, 7:33 p.m., 3 minutes late. That was fine. Traffic in Boulder could be unpredictable, especially with the snow melting and refreezing on the roads. He'd give her 10 minutes, maybe 15, and then he'd text Rachel some excuse about getting stood up, order a coffee to go, and drive home to where Theo was probably negotiating with the babysitter about bedtime. He should have been home. Thursday nights were when Theo liked to build elaborate Lego cities on the living room floor, narrating complex political dramas between the minifigures. Last week, there'd been a scandal involving the mayor of Lego City and some missing tax revenue. Evan had no idea where his 8-year-old learned this stuff, but it was infinitely more entertaining than whatever awkward small talk awaited him here. The door chimed. Evan looked up, expecting. He didn't know what he was expecting. Rachel had been maddeningly vague. "She's nice, she's smart, she works in environmental consulting. You'll like her." That was it. No photo, no last name, just a first name he'd already forgotten, and a time and place. But the woman who entered wasn't what stopped his breath. It was the wheelchair. Not the manual kind you saw in hospitals, the temporary equipment that whispered of short-term injury and eventual recovery. This was a sleek, black power wheelchair, the kind that cost more than Evan's truck, with subtle LED lights along the base and controls that looked like they belonged on a spaceship. The woman controlling it moved with practiced precision, navigating the narrow entrance with the kind of spatial awareness that spoke of years, not months. She was younger than Evan had expected, maybe early 30s, his age, with copper-red hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders, the kind of red that looked natural, like autumn leaves catching fire. She wore a charcoal wool coat, dark jeans, and boots that looked expensive, the kind with buckles and good leather. Her face was striking, sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, lips painted a shade of red that matched her hair, but it was her eyes that hit him like a physical blow. Green. Not the muddy hazel people politely called green, but genuine emerald, the color of deep forests and hidden things. And they were looking directly at him. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The cafe continued around them, the espresso machine hissing, the college kid sniffling, the couple in the corner reaching some kind of bitter détente. But Evan felt suspended, caught in the weight of her gaze. Then her face changed. It was subtle at first, a tightening around her eyes, a slight parting of her lips. But then color drained from her cheeks. Her hands gripped the controls of her wheelchair so hard her knuckles went white, and her eyes, those impossible green eyes, filled with something Evan recognized all too well. Panic. "No," she whispered, and even though she was still 15 feet away, somehow Evan heard her perfectly. "No, no, no." The barista looked up. The crying college kid paused mid-sniffle. Even the arguing couple stopped to stare. Evan took an instinctive step forward. "Are you—" "Not again." Her voice was louder now, shaking. "Please tell me this isn't— you're not—" She was crying, right there, in front of everyone, tears spilling down her cheeks and dripping onto her coat. Her hands fumbled with the wheelchair controls, and for a horrible moment, Evan thought she was going to back right out the door, flee into the March darkness, and disappear from his life before it even began. But she didn't. Instead, she just sat there, trapped between the entrance and escape, shaking and crying and whispering, "I can't do this again. I can't." Every instinct Evan had developed over 33 years screamed at him to help. He'd been a paramedic for 6 years before Theo was born, before Sarah got sick, before everything fell apart. He knew how to handle crisis, how to calm panic, how to make frightened people feel safe. But something in this woman's eyes told him that swooping in like a hero was exactly the wrong move. So instead, he knelt, right there, in the middle of the cafe, in his good jeans and the button-down shirt Rachel had made him buy specifically for this date. Evan Mercer lowered himself to one knee like a knight before a queen, making himself smaller, less threatening, putting himself at her eye level. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely carrying over the cafe noise. "My name is Evan. I think maybe we're supposed to be meeting each other tonight." She stared at him, tears still streaming, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that Evan recognized as the edge of a panic attack. "I'm going to be completely honest with you," Evan continued, keeping his voice steady and gentle. "I have no idea what's happening right now, but I can see you're upset, and I'm guessing I'm somehow part of the problem, even though I literally just got here and I don't think we've ever met before." A sound escaped her throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "So here's what I'm thinking," Evan said, still kneeling, acutely aware that the entire cafe was now watching them like they were the evening's entertainment. "I can leave right now. Just stand up, walk out that door, and you'll never see me again. Or I can stay. Get us some coffee, find a table, and we can figure out what the hell is going on. But I'm only going to stay if you want me to, because right now you look like you've seen a ghost, and the last thing I want to do is make your night worse." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Evan could see her mind working, weighing options, calculating risks. He stayed perfectly still, letting her take her time, letting her have control of the moment. Finally, she took a shaky breath and wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. "Did Rachel set this up?" Evan blinked. "Rachel's my sister. She's the one who arranged this whole thing. Why?" "Because my friend Amber set this up. She told me—" The woman's voice cracked. "She told me my date would also be in a wheelchair, someone who would understand." The words hit Evan like cold water. He rocked back slightly on his heels, understanding flooding through him in a sick wave. This wasn't a blind date. This was a setup, a well-intentioned, catastrophically misguided setup. "Jesus," Evan breathed. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Rachel just said she had a friend who was single and—" He stopped himself. "That's not important. What's important is that you're upset, and you have every right to be." "I'm not upset," she said, then immediately contradicted herself by letting out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Okay, I'm completely upset. I'm having a breakdown in a cafe in front of strangers because I thought, God, I actually thought maybe this time someone had listened to me." Evan stayed kneeling, even though his knee was starting to ache against the hardwood floor. "I'm listening now. What do you need?" She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Her eyes swept across his face, taking in the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair at the temples, the exhaustion he couldn't quite hide no matter how much coffee he drank. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Evan Mercer." "I'm Lena Hart." She wiped at her face again, this time with more composure. "And honestly, I need to know if you're going to run. Because they always run, Evan. Always. They either run immediately or they stick around long enough to make me believe they might stay, and then they run anyway, and I'm so goddamn tired of being the reason people run." The rawness in her voice gutted him. Evan thought of Sarah, of the way she'd looked at him in those final weeks, apologizing for being sick, for being a burden, as if she'd had any choice in the matter. He thought of the way people had treated him after she died. The pitying looks, the awkward silences, the friends who'd slowly disappeared because grief made people uncomfortable. "I'm not going to run," Evan said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I'm a single dad with an 8-year-old who still has nightmares about losing his mom. I work in home renovation because my paramedic schedule didn't work with single parenting. I haven't been on a date in 2 years because I've been too scared to let anyone into our life who might leave. And I'm kneeling in the middle of a cafe in front of at least a dozen strangers because a woman I just met is crying and I can't just walk away." Lena let out a breath that might have been relief or might have been resignation. "You're going to make your knee hurt if you stay down there. I've had worse." "Evan? Yeah? Can you—" She gestured vaguely at the chair across from a small table near the window. "Can you sit there instead? Because having you kneel in front of me is either incredibly romantic or incredibly weird, and I haven't decided which yet." Evan smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time that evening. "Fair enough." He stood, his knee protesting slightly, and moved to the table she'd indicated. Lena maneuvered her wheelchair into position across from him with practiced ease, the kind of unconscious competence that came from years of navigating a world that wasn't built for her. Up close, Evan could see more details. A small scar at the corner of her left eyebrow. Silver earrings shaped like tiny mountains. The way her hands trembled slightly as she removed her coat, revealing a soft green sweater that matched her eyes. She was beautiful. Not in the magazine perfect way, but in the way real people were beautiful. All sharp edges and soft curves and signs of living. "So," Lena said, her voice steadier now but still carrying an edge of fragility, "this is the part where you usually ask me what happened, and I have to decide whether to tell you the truth or the sanitized version that makes people comfortable." "Or," Evan offered, "this could be the part where I get us coffee and we figure out what the hell our sisters were thinking when they orchestrated this particular disaster." Lena's lips twitched. "I like that option better. What do you drink?" "Something with an embarrassing amount of caramel and whipped cream. I stopped pretending to like black coffee when I turned 30. "Thank God," Evan said, standing. "I've been ordering vanilla lattes and pretending they're not that sweet for years." He walked to the counter, acutely aware of the barista's curious gaze. The man bun guy took his order without comment, but there was something in his expression that looked like approval. Or maybe Evan was just projecting. Either way, he was grateful when the guy didn't ask questions. While he waited, Evan pulled out his phone and fired off a text to Rachel. "Evan, we need to talk about your definition of blind date." Rachel, "It's going badly? Give it a chance, Ev." Evan, "Did you know Amber told Lena her date would also be in a wheelchair?" There was a long pause. Evan watched the 3 dots appear and disappear several times before Rachel's response finally came through. Rachel, "Oh God. Oh no. Evan, I had no idea. Amber just said she had a friend who'd be perfect for you, and I trusted her, and I'm so sorry." Evan, "We'll talk later, but for the record, next time someone says they have the perfect person for me, I'm running." Rachel, "Is she still there?" Evan glanced back at the table where Lena sat, staring out the window at the darkening Boulder Street. In profile, she looked like something from a painting, all elegant lines and hidden sadness. Evan, "Yeah, she's still here." Rachel, "Then maybe it's not a complete disaster." The barista called his name. Evan collected their drinks, a vanilla latte for him, some caramel monstrosity for her, and 2 chocolate chip cookies because the situation seemed to demand comfort food. When he returned to the table, Lena was wiping at her eyes with a napkin, her mascara now completely ruined but her composure mostly restored. "Peace offering," Evan said, sliding the drink and cookie across to her. "Or apology on behalf of well-meaning siblings everywhere." Lena picked up the cup, wrapping both hands around it like it was a lifeline. "Did you text Rachel?" "Immediately. She claims innocence through ignorance. Amber will say the same thing." Lena took a sip, closing her eyes briefly. "God, that's good. Terrible for me, but good." They sat in silence for a moment, the earlier tension slowly dissolving into something more manageable. Evan broke off a piece of his cookie, chewed it slowly, and tried to figure out what the hell to say next. Lena beat him to it. "I was in a car accident," she said abruptly, her eyes fixed on her drink. 5 years ago. Skiing trip to Aspen with my boyfriend and some friends. We were coming down from the mountain, I was driving, and some kid in a pickup ran a red light going 60. T-boned us right at my door. My boyfriend walked away with a broken collarbone. I ended up with a shattered spine and 8 hours of surgery that left me with full function from the waist up and nothing below. Evan's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but every phrase that came to mind felt hollow. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard. You're so brave." All the things people had said to him after Sarah died, words that meant well but landed like stones. "The boyfriend left after 63 days, Lena continued, her voice flat now, reciting facts. I counted. He said he couldn't handle it, that it wasn't what he'd signed up for, that he was too young to be a caretaker. As if I'd signed up for any of this either. As if I wasn't also too young to have my entire life rearranged because some kid couldn't be bothered to stop at a red light. Jesus, Lena. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she said quickly, finally meeting his eyes. "I'm telling you because if we're going to do this, whatever this is, I need you to understand something. I've been on 7 first dates since the accident. 7. Do you know how many second dates I've had?" Evan shook his head. 0. Because what happens is this. Either they can't handle it from the start and they make up some excuse to leave before the appetizers arrive, or they stick around long enough to convince themselves they're good people, that they can handle dating someone in a wheelchair. They ask invasive questions about my sex life, or they treat me like I'm made of glass, or worst of all, they turn me into some kind of inspiration porn. You're so brave. You're so strong. If I were you, I don't know if I could go on. Her voice had risen slightly, and Evan could see tears threatening again at the corners of her eyes. So when Amber told me this date would be different, that she'd specifically matched me with someone who would understand what it's like to navigate the world differently, I actually believed her. I thought maybe, finally, someone had listened. And then you walked in, and you're, She gestured at him with one hand. "You're just a regular guy. A handsome regular guy, which somehow makes it worse." And I realized I'd been tricked again, set up like some kind of social experiment to see if regular people can handle dating someone like me. "Someone like you," Evan repeated slowly. "Yes." "You mean someone smart enough to work in environmental consulting? Someone with good taste in overly sweet coffee drinks? Someone brave enough to keep showing up for dates even though you've been hurt 7 times? Because that's what I'm seeing, Lena. Not a wheelchair. Not a disability. Just a woman who's been through hell and is still here, still trying." Lena's breath caught. "Don't. Don't what? Don't say the right things. Don't be understanding and kind and everything I've been waiting for someone to be. Because then when you leave, and you will leave, Evan, they always do, it's going to hurt so much worse." The pain in her voice was so raw, so exposed, that Evan felt it like a physical ache in his chest. He thought about all the things he could say, all the promises he could make, all the ways he could try to convince her he was different. But he'd learned something in the 2 years since Sarah died. Words were cheap. Promises meant nothing when life could shatter everything in a heartbeat. So instead, he told her the truth. 2 years ago, Evan said, his voice low, my wife Sarah collapsed in our kitchen while making breakfast. Just fell over mid-sentence, no warning, nothing. Theo was 6. He saw the whole thing. By the time the ambulance got there, she was gone. Massive heart attack, genetic condition nobody knew about. She was 31 years old, and she died making pancakes on a Tuesday morning. Lena's expression shifted, softening. For a year after that, Evan continued, I couldn't let anyone near us. Not just romantically, but at all. I stopped answering calls from friends. I pulled Theo out of activities. I convinced myself that if I could just keep us small, keep us contained, nothing else bad could happen. And it was killing us. Theo started having these nightmares where everyone he loved disappeared. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, functioned on autopilot. He paused, taking a breath. Rachel finally staged an intervention about 6 months ago. Made me start therapy, forced me to let the babysitter actually babysit instead of hovering, convinced me to let Theo join soccer, even though the thought of him on a field without me terrified me. And tonight, she convinced me to come here because she said it was time to stop being afraid of living. Are you? Lena asked quietly. Afraid? Terrified, Evan admitted. Because you're right, Lena. People leave. People die. People decide you're too complicated or too broken or too much work. And I'm scared shitless of bringing someone into Theo's life who won't stay because he's already lost one parent and I can't... His voice cracked. I can't let him lose anyone else. They sat in silence, two broken people in a small cafe, the weight of their confessions hanging in the air between them like smoke. Outside, snow had started falling again, soft flakes drifting past the window like small ghosts. So what do we do? Lena finally asked. Because I'll be honest, this is either the worst first date of my life or the most honest one, and I genuinely don't know which. Evan surprised himself by laughing. How about we start over? Not as Rachel's brother and Amber's friend, but as two people who both know what it's like to have life kick the shit out of you. Start over, Lena repeated, considering. Then, slowly, she extended her hand across the table. Hi, I'm Lena Hart. I'm 32 years old, I design environmental impact assessments for a living, and I've been told I'm terrible at first dates because I tend to trauma dump on people. Evan took her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm warm from the coffee cup. Hi, Lena. I'm Evan Mercer. I'm 33, I renovate houses, and I'm terrible at first dates because I usually spend them wishing I was home watching my kid play with Legos. Tell me about him, Lena said, not letting go of his hand. Theo. And so Evan did. He told her about Theo's elaborate Lego cities, about the nightmares that were slowly getting better, about the way the kid had Sarah's laugh and her stubborn chin. He told her about soccer practices and terrible third-grade jokes, and the way Theo had asked, just last week, if Dad was ever going to be happy again. Lena listened with her full attention, asking questions that showed she was really hearing him, not just waiting for her turn to talk. And when he was done, she told him about her work, about adaptive climbing, about the slow, painful process of rebuilding a life from scratch after the accident. They talked until their coffee went cold, until the arguing couple left and the crying college kid packed up and the cafe started putting chairs on tables. They talked about favorite movies and worst jobs and the strange comfort of Boulder in winter. They didn't talk about the future or make promises or pretend to know where this was going. Finally, the barista, man bun guy, came over with an apologetic smile. Hey folks, we're closing in 10. Evan glanced at his watch and was shocked to see it was after 10. Damn. Sorry, we didn't realize. No worries, man. That was... The barista gestured vaguely. That was really something. The way you handled all that earlier? Respect. After he walked away, Lena raised an eyebrow at Evan. Respect from hipster baristas. I think you've peaked, right? It's all downhill from here. They gathered their things, moving with the unhurried pace of people who weren't quite ready for the night to end. Outside, the snow was still falling, coating the Boulder streets in fresh white. Lena's wheelchair left thin tracks through the accumulation. Where are you parked? Evan asked. Accessible spot around the corner. You? 2 blocks that way, he pointed. I can walk you to your car. You don't have to. I know, but I want to, if that's okay. Lena studied his face for a moment, then nodded. They moved through the quiet streets, their breath misting in the cold air. The city was peaceful at this hour. The usual chaos of downtown Boulder hushed under the snowfall. When they reached her van, a sleek silver Honda with a wheelchair ramp, Lena turned to face him. The streetlight caught her hair, turning it into living copper. Evan? Yeah? Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me. She smiled then, genuine and warm, and it transformed her entire face. This was either the worst first date ever or the best disaster. I honestly can't tell. There's a middle ground, Evan offered. It could just be the beginning of something honest. Honest? Lena repeated, testing the word. I like that. She programmed his number into her phone, and he did the same with hers. They said goodnight without kissing, without making immediate plans, without any of the usual first date rituals. But as Evan walked back to his truck, his hands shoved deep in his pockets against the cold, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years. Hope. His phone buzzed as he reached his truck. Lena. Made it home. Theo still up? Evan. Negotiating his third bedtime extension with the babysitter, I'm sure. How about you? Lena. Home safe? Wheelchair has heated grips. I win winter. Evan. That's actually amazing. My truck's heater barely works. Lena. Evan? Evan. Yeah? Lena. I had a really good time tonight, despite the crying and the trauma dumping and the general disaster of it all. Evan. Me too. Lena. Want to do it again sometime? The good parts, not the disaster parts. Evan sat in his truck, snow accumulating on the windshield, and typed his response. Evan. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Later that night, after Theo had finally crashed and Evan was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, his phone buzzed with one more message. Lena. Hey, Evan. I'm scared. Evan. Of what? Lena. Of hoping this might be different, of letting myself believe someone might actually stay. Evan stared at the message for a long time before responding. Evan. I'm scared too, but maybe being scared together is better than being scared alone. Lena. Maybe. Lena. Good night, Evan. Evan. Good night, Lena. He fell asleep with his phone still in his hand, and for the first time in 731 days, he didn't dream about Sarah dying. He dreamed about copper hair and green eyes, and the sound of honest laughter in a small cafe while snow fell like hope outside the window. The text from Lena came 3 days later, on a Sunday morning when Evan was halfway through replacing the rotted deck boards on a client's Victorian in North Boulder. His phone buzzed in his tool belt, and he almost ignored it. Another benefit of working with his hands was the excuse to be unreachable, but something made him pull off his work gloves and check. Lena. There's an adaptive climbing gym in Louisville. They open climb session today at 2. Want to see what I do when I'm not crying in cafes? Evan read the message twice, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. Theo was at Rachel's for the afternoon, part of the new routine where Evan actually let other people help, instead of white-knuckling through single parenthood alone. He had no excuse to say no, which meant he had to confront the fear that had been building since Thursday night. The fear that their honest, messy first date had been a fluke, that the connection he'd felt was something he'd imagined in his desperation for human contact. Evan. I've never climbed before. Will I embarrass myself? Lena. Absolutely. But I promise to laugh with you, not at you. Evan. Deal. Send me the address. 2 hours later, Evan pulled into the parking lot of a converted warehouse with Summit Adapted painted in bold letters across the brick facade. His palms were sweating despite the March chill, and he caught himself checking his reflection in the rearview mirror like a teenager before prom. He'd changed out of his work clothes into jeans and a Henley that didn't have sawdust ground into the fabric, and he'd even run a comb through his hair, which felt ridiculous but also necessary. The interior of the gym was nothing like he'd expected. Instead of the sterile, institutional feel he'd unconsciously anticipated, it was alive with color and energy. Climbing walls soared 30 feet high, marked with holds in every color imaginable. But what struck Evan most was how the space had been designed. Wide pathways between walls, lowered belay stations, adaptive equipment hanging from the walls like art installations. And everywhere, people of every ability climbing, spotting, laughing, pushing themselves higher. He found Lena near the back wall, wearing athletic leggings and a gray tank top, her copper hair pulled back in a high ponytail. She was in a specialized climbing harness that Evan didn't fully understand, talking animatedly with a young guy who looked like he ate protein powder for breakfast. When she saw Evan, her face lit up in a way that made the 3-day wait feel worth it. "You came," she said, wheeling over. "I came. Fair warning, the highest I've climbed recently is a ladder, and I'm pretty sure that doesn't count." "It absolutely doesn't count," she gestured to the young guy. "This is Marcus. He's going to teach you the basics so I can show off without worrying about you dying." Marcus grinned, extending a hand that could have crushed walnuts. "Don't worry, man. We'll start you on the 5.5s. Kindergarten level." For the next 45 minutes, Marcus walked Evan through harness fitting, basic knots, and belay technique with the patience of someone who genuinely loved what he did. Evan was clumsy at first, his fingers fumbling with the carabiners and ropes, but muscle memory from his paramedic days kicked in. These were different knots, but the principle was the same. Trust the equipment, trust the training, don't panic. Okay, Marcus finally said, you're not going to kill anyone. Let's see if Lena's ready to actually climb. They found her at a wall marked with orange and blue holds, doing stretches that looked like they should require a yoga certification. When she saw them approaching, she wheeled to a specialized platform that had been built into the base of the wall. "Watch and learn, Mercer," she called out. What happened next made Evan forget how to breathe. Lena transferred from her wheelchair to the wall with practiced efficiency, her upper body strength obvious in every controlled movement. She clipped into the rope system, something Marcus quietly explained was called a counterweight belay. And then she was moving, pulling herself up the wall with her arms alone, her legs hanging but not hindering, her body flowing from hold to hold like water finding its path. She climbed like she was having a conversation with the wall, pausing occasionally to chalk her hands, studying the route, then committing to reaches that looked impossible until she made them look easy. 15 feet up, 20, 25. She didn't stop until she'd tagged the top, and when she looked down, she was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Okay," she called down. "More than okay," Evan called back, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "That was incredible." She lowered herself down with the same control she'd used going up, and when she transferred back to her wheelchair, there was a sheen of sweat on her face, and her eyes were bright with exertion and joy. "Your turn," she said. "Absolutely not. There's no way I can follow that." "Different route, Evan. You're not competing with me. You're just trying something new." Marcus set him up on a beginner route marked with green holds. Evan stared up at the wall, acutely aware of how high 30 feet suddenly seemed. "Don't think," Lena said from below. "Just climb." So he did, hand over hand, foot after foot, finding holds that felt secure and trusting them to bear his weight. 10 feet up, his arms started shaking. 15 feet, and his legs felt like concrete. But Lena's voice floated up from below, steady and encouraging, and somehow he kept going until his hand slapped the top marker and Marcus was whooping from the belay station. Coming down was harder than going up, but he managed it without falling or embarrassing himself too badly. When his feet hit the mat, his entire body was trembling. "Well?" Lena asked. "That was terrifying and amazing, and I might throw up." She laughed, that genuine, full-throated laugh he'd heard in the cafe, and handed him a water bottle. "Welcome to Adaptive Climbing. We meet every Sunday at 2 if you want to come back." "Is that an invitation?" "That's an invitation." They stayed for another hour, Evan attempting progressively harder routes while Lena worked on a project climb that Marcus said she'd been struggling with for weeks. Evan watched her fall 3 times, watched her shake out her arms and study the route and try again. On the 4th attempt, she made it past the section that had stopped her before, her face set in concentration so intense it was almost meditative. Later, in the parking lot, as the sun started its descent behind the Flatirons, Lena transferred into her van while Evan leaned against his truck, both of them exhausted in the good way that came from using your body fully. "Can I ask you something?" Evan said. "Depends on the question." "How did you find this?" "The climbing, I mean, after the accident." Lena was quiet for a moment, her hands resting on her wheels. "My physical therapist suggested it about a year after I got out of rehab. I told her she was insane, that there was no way I could climb without my legs. She said I was right. I couldn't climb the way I used to, but I could climb a different way if I was willing to learn." "And were you willing to learn?" "Not at first. I was so angry, Evan, at my body, at the universe, at every person who could walk without thinking about it. I didn't want to adapt. I wanted my old life back." She looked up at him, the setting sun turning her eyes into chips of green glass. "But eventually, I got tired of being angry all the time. So I came here convinced I'd fail, convinced I'd prove my therapist wrong. And then I made it 10 feet up that wall and I cried for an hour straight because I'd found something I'd thought I'd lost forever." "What was that?" "The feeling of being strong, of being capable, of being something other than broken." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Climbing saved my life, Evan. Not literally, but close enough." Evan pushed off his truck and moved closer, careful to stay at her level, to not loom over her. You're not broken, Lena. You're just built different now. Is that your professional opinion? That's my personal observation. She studied his face for a long moment, and Evan forced himself not to look away, to let her see whatever she was looking for. Finally, she nodded as if she'd confirmed something. You hungry? She asked. Because I'm starving, and there's a Vietnamese place near here that has the best pho in Boulder County. I'm buying, Evan said immediately. Like hell you are. We're going Dutch until further notice. Stubborn. You have no idea. The restaurant was small and crowded, the kind of place where the decor hadn't been updated since 1987, but the food made it irrelevant. They squeezed into a corner booth, Lena transferring to the bench seat with a quick efficiency that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times before, while her wheelchair folded and tucked beside the table. Over bowls of steaming pho and Vietnamese coffee sweet enough to make their teeth hurt, they talked about everything and nothing. Lena told him about her work, about writing environmental impact statements that most people never read, but that could determine whether entire ecosystems lived or died. Evan told her about his current project, a craftsman restoration in Mapleton Hill, where the owners wanted to maintain historical accuracy while adding modern accessibility features. That's ironic, Lena said, slurping noodles. What is? You're literally making old houses accessible while I'm trying to figure out how to make my life accessible to new people. Evan set down his spoon. Is that what you're doing? With me? Maybe. I don't know yet. She met his eyes. After the cafe, I told myself I was done. No more dates, no more hoping, no more setting myself up for disappointment. But then I kept thinking about what you said, about being scared together. And I thought maybe, just this once, I could try again. I'm glad you did. Are you? Because I'm a lot, Evan. I'm complicated and demanding, and I have bad days where I don't want to leave my apartment or talk to anyone. I need help with things that most people don't think twice about, and I hate asking for it. My body doesn't always cooperate, and I get frustrated, and sometimes I take that frustration out on people who don't deserve it. Okay, Evan said calmly. Okay, that's it? Just okay. Lena, I'm a widower with a traumatized 8-year-old. Some nights, Theo wakes up screaming because he's dreamed about his mom dying. I still can't go into the kitchen without remembering finding Sarah on the floor. I see a therapist every other week and I'm on medication for anxiety, and I have moments where I can barely function. I'm not a knight in shining armor. I'm just a guy who's doing his best to survive and maybe, if I'm lucky, find some moments of happiness in between the hard parts. Lena's eyes were bright, and Evan couldn't tell if she was going to cry or laugh. She did neither, just reached across the table and took his hand. What are we doing? She asked quietly. I think we're trying, Evan said. Just trying. No promises, no expectations, just two people who've been through hell seeing if maybe they can find some heaven together. That's either beautiful or the cheesiest thing I've ever heard. Can it be both? Yeah, Lena said, squeezing his hand. It can be both. They finished their meal and lingered over coffee, neither quite ready for the evening to end. The restaurant slowly emptied around them until they were the last ones there, the owner wiping down tables and shooting them increasingly pointed looks. In the parking lot, under a sky full of stars that you could actually see this far from Denver's light pollution, Lena turned to Evan before getting into her van. Next Sunday? She asked. Climbing again? I'll be there. And maybe during the week? Dinner or coffee or just talking? I'd like that. But fair warning, some nights I have to bring Theo. He's part of the package. Lena's expression softened. I'd like to meet him. When you're ready. When he's ready. I'll talk to him, see how he feels about Dad maybe having a friend who's a girl. A friend who's a girl, Lena repeated, amused. Is that what we're calling this? I don't know what we're calling this yet. Do we have to decide right now? No, she said. We don't. But that night, lying in bed after checking on Theo 3 times, an old habit he was trying to break but couldn't quite manage, Evan's phone buzzed. Lena. I keep trying to talk myself out of this. Evan. Any luck? Lena. None whatsoever. You? Evan. Not even a little bit. Lena. That's either really good or really bad. Evan. Let's go with really good and see what happens. Lena. Deal. Good night, Evan. Evan. Good night, Lena. The next week unfolded in a pattern of text messages and phone calls that slowly built something neither of them wanted to name too soon. Lena sent him articles about accessible renovation that he actually found fascinating. Evan sent her photos of Theo's increasingly elaborate Lego cities. They talked about work and family and the weird little details of their days that felt too small to share with most people, but somehow perfect for each other. On Wednesday, Evan picked up Thai food and drove to Lena's apartment in South Boulder, a ground floor unit in a complex that had clearly been designed with accessibility in mind. She answered the door in sweats and a CU Boulder t-shirt, her hair piled in a messy bun, and Evan thought she'd never looked more beautiful. They ate on her couch, watching a documentary about free solo climbing that had Lena providing running commentary about everything the climber was doing wrong. Her apartment was small but carefully organized, everything at wheelchair height, everything in its place. Photos covered one wall, Lena before the accident, standing on skis at the top of a mountain, her smile wide and careless in a way that made Evan's heart ache. Lena with friends, Lena at her college graduation, Lena in a hospital bed giving the camera a tired thumbs up. That was 3 months post-accident, Lena said, catching him looking. My friend Jess took it. She was trying to document my journey for inspiration or whatever. I look like death. You look alive, Evan said. That counts for something. Does it? Yeah, it does. On Friday, Evan worked up the courage to tell Theo about Lena. They were in the kitchen making grilled cheese, one of the few meals Evan had truly mastered, when he cleared his throat and said, as casually as possible, So I met someone, a friend. Her name's Lena. Theo looked up from the cheese he was grating with intense concentration. At 8, he was small for his age, with Sarah's dark curls and Evan's gray eyes. He'd been quiet since Sarah died, more careful, as if he was afraid too much noise or enthusiasm might break something. A friend like Marcus from soccer, Theo asked, or a friend like Aunt Rachel? Different kind of friend, like someone Dad might want to spend time with, maybe someone you might want to meet if you're okay with that. Theo was quiet, his small hands moving the cheese back and forth across the grater. Finally, he said, Is she going to leave like Mom did? The question hit Evan like a physical blow. He set down the spatula and knelt beside his son, putting himself at eye level the way he'd done with Lena that first night. Mom didn't want to leave, Evan said gently. You know that, right? She didn't choose to go. But she's still gone. Yeah, buddy, she's still gone. So how do you know this Lena won't go too? Evan took a breath, forcing himself to be honest. I don't know. People can't promise they'll stay forever, but I know that Lena is kind and she's funny and she makes Dad smile, and I thought maybe if you wanted to, you could meet her. No pressure, just maybe coffee or ice cream, and if you don't like her or you're not ready, that's completely okay. Theo studied his father's face with the seriousness of someone much older. Does she make you happy? Like Mom used to? Different kind of happy, but yeah, she does. Okay, Theo said finally. I'll meet her, but Dad? Yeah? If she's mean, or if she makes you sad, I'm going to tell her to leave. Evan pulled his son into a hug, breathing in the smell of shampoo and little boy sweat. Deal. He texted Lena that night. Evan. Theo wants to meet you. He's threatened to kick you out if you're mean to me, so fair warning. Lena. I'm terrified and honored in equal measure. What is he like? What do I need to know? Should I study? I feel like I should study. Evan. Lena. Breathe. He's 8. He likes Legos, bad jokes, and ice cream. You'll be fine. Lena. What if I'm not? What if he hates me? What if I say the wrong thing? Evan. Then we'll figure it out together. No pressure, remember? Lena. When? Evan. Sunday after climbing. If you're up for it. Lena. I'll be up for it. I'll be terrified, but I'll be up for it. Sunday arrived cold and clear, one of those late March days where winter was finally loosening its grip, but not quite ready to let go. Evan and Theo arrived at the climbing gym early, Theo's hand tight in his as they walked through the doors. Is she here? Theo whispered, his eyes huge. Not yet. Want to climb while we wait? They were halfway up the beginner wall. Theo, a natural, fearless in a way that made Evan's heart clench with equal parts pride and terror, when Evan heard Marcus's booming voice say, "Look who's finally here!" Lena wheeled through the entrance, and Evan's first thought was that she looked as nervous as he felt. She'd worn a purple climbing tank and black leggings, her hair in its usual ponytail, but there was tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there last week. "Down," Evan said to Theo. "Let's go say hi." They descended the wall, Theo moving with the confidence of someone who'd already decided gravity was just a suggestion. When they reached the floor, Evan felt his son's hand slip into his and squeeze tight. "Theo," Evan said gently, "this is my friend Lena. Lena, this is my son, Theo." Lena wheeled forward slowly, stopping a respectful distance away and lowering herself slightly so she wasn't looming over the boy. "Hi, Theo. Your dad's told me a lot about you. He says you're really good at Legos." Theo stared at her, his eyes moving from her face to her wheelchair and back again. The silence stretched long enough that Evan started mentally preparing an exit strategy. Then Theo said in his clear, high voice, "Why do you have a wheelchair?" "Theo," Evan started, but Lena held up a hand. "That's okay," she said, looking directly at Theo. "I have a wheelchair because my legs don't work anymore. I was in a car accident and it hurt my spine, so now I use this to get around." "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes, but not right now." "Can you still do stuff?" "Lots of stuff. I can climb walls, drive a car, work, hang out with friends. I just do them a little differently than people who can walk." Theo processed this, his face serious. Then he asked, "Can you play Legos?" A smile broke across Lena's face like sunrise. "I love Legos. What do you like to build?" "Cities, really big cities with governments and scandals." "Scandals?" Lena looked at Evan, eyebrows raised. "Don't ask," Evan said. "I've no idea where he learns this stuff." For the next hour, Evan climbed while Lena and Theo sat on the mat below, Theo explaining in elaborate detail the political structure of his latest Lego creation, while Lena listened with genuine interest, asking questions that suggested she was actually following his 8-year-old logic. Evan kept glancing down, expecting disaster, but instead he saw his son animated in a way he hadn't been in months, talking with his hands and laughing at something Lena said. When it was Lena's turn to climb, Theo watched with the same wide-eyed wonder Evan had felt the first time he'd seen her move up the wall. "She's really strong," Theo said, awed. "Yeah," Evan agreed. "She is." After climbing, they went for ice cream at a place on Pearl Street that had outdoor seating and ramps. Theo ordered chocolate with gummy bears, Lena got mint chip, and Evan stuck with vanilla because he was boring and comfortable with it. "So, Theo," Lena said, carefully navigating a spoonful of ice cream, "your dad tells me you're on a soccer team." "Yeah, I'm not very good, though." "What position do you play?" "Defense. Coach says I'm good at getting in the way." Lena laughed. "That's an important skill. Defense wins games." They talked about soccer and school and Theo's best friend Marcus, different Marcus, Theo clarified, who had a dog that could skateboard. And then, as they were finishing their ice cream, Theo suddenly asked, "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" Evan choked on his vanilla. Lena carefully set down her spoon, her expression thoughtful. "That's a good question," she said. "What do you think? Would that be okay with you?" Theo was quiet, swinging his legs under the table. Finally, he said, "I don't want Dad to be sad anymore, and he smiles when he talks about you. So maybe it would be okay, but..." "But what?" Lena asked gently. "But you can't leave." "Because if you leave, Dad will be really sad, and I don't know if I can fix him again." The weight of those words settled over the table like snow. Evan felt his throat close up, and when he looked at Lena, he saw tears shining in her eyes. "Theo," Lena said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes, "I can't promise I'll never leave, because life is unpredictable and scary sometimes. But I can promise that I will never ever leave because things are hard, or because I don't want to try anymore. And I promise that I will always, always be honest with you and your dad about how I'm feeling. Is that fair?" Theo considered this with his characteristic seriousness. Then he nodded. "That's fair." "Good," Lena said. Because I really like your dad, and I think you're pretty cool too. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to keep hanging out with both of you. Can we build Legos together? Absolutely. And can you teach me to climb like you do? When you're a little older, and if your dad says it's okay. Theo looked at Evan, who was trying very hard not to cry in the middle of an ice cream shop on Pearl Street. Dad? Theo asked. Is it okay if Lena is your girlfriend? Evan looked at Lena, who was watching him with those green eyes that saw everything, who'd met his broken places with her own and hadn't run. Yeah, buddy, he managed. That would be very okay with me. That night, after Theo was asleep, Evan called Lena. Hey, she answered, her voice soft in the dark. Hey yourself. I just wanted to say thank you for today, for being so good with him. He's a special kid, Evan. You're raising him right. I'm scared shitless most of the time that I'm screwing him up. Welcome to parenting. I think that's the default setting. She paused. Can I tell you something? Always. When Theo asked me not to leave, I almost broke down right there. Because the truth is, Evan, I'm terrified. Not of you or him, but of this. Of caring about people again. Of being vulnerable. Of building something that could fall apart. But you stayed, Evan said. I stayed. Why? Because for the first time in 5 years, I'm more scared of missing out on something beautiful than I am of getting hurt. Because your son looks at me like I'm a person, not a wheelchair. Because you make me believe that maybe I'm not too broken to be loved. You're not, Evan said fiercely. Lena, you're not broken. You're just human, like the rest of us. Say that to me when I'm having a bad day and I'm yelling at you for no reason. I will, every time if I have to. She was quiet for a moment, and Evan could hear the faint sound of music in the background, something classical and melancholy. Evan, she finally said. Yeah? I think I'm falling for you, and it's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't know what to do with it. Evan closed his eyes, his free hand pressed against his chest where his heart was doing somersaults. I know exactly what you mean, because I'm falling too, and I haven't felt this alive in years, and it's terrifying. What do we do? We keep falling, Evan said, and hope like hell we catch each other. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? Not even a little bit. They talked until midnight, their voices soft and intimate in the darkness, building something fragile and precious out of honesty and hope. And when they finally said goodnight, Evan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Theo breathing steadily in the next room, and thought that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. Spring arrived in Boulder with the tentative hope of new beginnings, and with it came a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy. Sundays were for climbing, where Theo would work on the kids' wall while Evan and Lena pushed each other on increasingly difficult routes. Wednesdays were for dinner, sometimes at Lena's apartment, where Theo would sprawl on her living room floor with Legos while the adults cooked, sometimes at Evan's house, where Lena would navigate the narrow hallways with practiced ease. Saturdays varied, farmers markets, hikes on accessible trails, lazy afternoons at the library, where Theo would bury himself in books, while Evan and Lena sat close enough that their shoulders touched. It was easy, which should have been Evan's first warning that nothing good ever stayed easy. 3 months into whatever they were calling this, on a Tuesday morning in early June, Evan was replacing crown molding in a gun barrel ranch when his phone rang. Lena's name flashed across the screen, which was unusual. She knew his work hours, knew he didn't take calls unless it was an emergency. Hey, he answered, balancing the phone between his ear and shoulder while his hand stayed occupied with the trim. Everything okay? Silence. Not empty silence, but the kind weighted with something heavy and unspoken. Lena? I need to see you. Her voice sounded wrong, flattened out, like she'd pressed all the emotion out of it deliberately. Can you come to my apartment after work? Evan's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Just, please come. Around 6? Lena, you're scaring me. 6 o'clock, Evan. I'll see you then. She hung up before he could respond, and Evan stood there in the empty house with his phone in his hand and his heart in his throat, trying to convince himself he was overreacting. Maybe she had good news. Maybe she wanted to talk about something exciting. Maybe he was being paranoid because happiness always felt temporary, like something that could be snatched away the moment you trusted it. The rest of the day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Evan texted Rachel to ask if she could keep Theo for dinner, made up some excuse about a work thing running late. He tried Lena twice, but both calls went straight to voicemail. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, he'd convinced himself of a dozen different disasters, each worse than the last. Lena's apartment door was unlocked when he arrived, which was unlike her. She was meticulous about security, about controlling her space. Evan let himself in and found her sitting by the window, her wheelchair angled toward the fading sunlight, her face in profile. She didn't turn when he entered. "Lena? Close the door." He did, moving slowly into the room like he was approaching something wild and easily spooked. The apartment felt different today, colder despite the June warmth. Photos still lined the walls, but they seemed to mock him now with their frozen moments of before and after. "What's going on?" Evan asked, keeping his distance, giving her space. Lena finally turned to face him, and what Evan saw in her expression made his chest tighten. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying for hours, her face pale beneath her freckles. But more than that, she looked scared in a way he'd never seen, not even that first night at the cafe. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "about us, about what we're doing." "Okay," Evan said slowly, his heart starting to hammer. And I think we need to stop." The words hit him like a physical blow. Evan actually took a step back, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the wall. "What?" "This, us, whatever we're calling it, we need to end it now before it goes any further." "I don't understand. Last week you were talking about going to the mountains with Theo and me in July. You were making plans. What changed?" Lena's hands gripped her wheels so tightly her knuckles went white. "I'm falling in love with you, Evan. That's what changed." Of all the things Evan had expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. He stared at her, trying to make the words make sense, trying to understand how falling in love was a reason to end things rather than continue them. "I'm not following," he finally managed. "I'm falling in love with you," Lena repeated, her voice breaking slightly on the words. "And I can't survive being someone's project again. I can't survive being the broken thing you think you can fix." "Lena, I don't think you're broken. Don't!" Her voice cracked like a whip, sharp and desperate. "Don't lie to me, Evan. I've seen how you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I've seen you hover when I'm transferring from my chair. I've heard the way you phrase things, always so careful, always making sure I'm okay, always ready to swoop in and help whether I ask for it or not." "Because I care about you," Evan said, his own voice rising. "Because I don't want you to struggle if I can help. That's not treating you like a project. That's just being a decent human being." "Is it?" Lena wheeled closer, and Evan could see tears tracking down her face now. "Or is it you trying to be the hero again? Trying to save the poor disabled woman because you couldn't save your wife?" The accusation landed like a knife between his ribs. Evan felt the air leave his lungs, felt something hot and painful bloom in his chest. "That's not fair," he said quietly. "Isn't it? Be honest, Evan. When you look at me, don't you see someone who needs saving, someone who needs protection, someone who can't quite manage on her own?" "No," Evan said firmly. "When I look at you, I see the strongest person I've ever met. I see someone who climbs walls with just her arms, who rebuilds her entire life after it was destroyed, who had the courage to let me in even after being hurt over and over. That's what I see." "Then why can't you let me struggle?" Lena's voice broke completely now, dissolving into something raw and wounded. "Why can't you just let me figure things out myself sometimes? Why do you always have to help?" "Because I'm terrified." The words exploded out of Evan before he could stop them. "Because every single day I'm terrified that something's going to happen to you, that I'm going to lose you the way I lost Sarah, and I can't—" His voice cracked. "I can't survive that again, Lena. I can't watch another person I love die." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the sun continued its descent behind the mountains, painting the room in shades of amber and shadow. "I'm not dying," Lena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that." "Do you?" 'Cause the way you treat me sometimes, it's like you think I'm made of glass. Like any wrong move could shatter me. She wiped at her face with shaking hands. I've spent 5 years learning how to be strong again, Evan. 5 years fighting to be seen as capable, as whole, as someone who doesn't need constant protection. And then I meet you, and you're wonderful and kind, and you make me feel things I thought I'd never feel again. But you also make me feel fragile in a way I hate. I don't mean to. I know you don't. That's what makes this so hard. Lena's voice was gentler now, but no less final. You're not trying to hurt me. You're trying to love me. But the way you love feels like it's suffocating me, and I won't go back to being someone's burden. You're not a burden, Evan said desperately. Lena, you're not. Then prove it, she interrupted. Prove it by leaving. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Evan felt his world tilting sideways, felt everything he'd started to believe in crumbling beneath his feet. You're really doing this, he said. And it wasn't a question. I have to, before I lose myself completely trying to be what you need me to be. What I need you to be? Lena, all I need you to be is yourself. The version of myself that doesn't need help. The version that can handle everything alone. Because I can't be that person, Evan. Some days I need help getting dressed. Some days my body doesn't cooperate and I'm exhausted by noon. Some days I'm angry and frustrated and I take it out on the people around me, and I need someone who can see all of that and not try to fix it, not try to make it easier, just accept it as part of who I am. I can do that, Evan said, hearing the desperation in his own voice and hating it. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent 3 months trying to make everything perfect for me. Researching accessible restaurants, checking ramp angles, asking if I'm tired, if I need anything, if you can help. And it's sweet, Evan, it really is. But it's also exhausting, because it means you see me as someone who needs those things rather than someone who can figure them out myself. Evan ran his hands through his hair, trying to organize thoughts that felt like scattered puzzle pieces. So what do you want me to do? Ignore you when you're struggling? Pretend I don't care? I want you to trust me, Lena said simply. Trust that I know my own limits. Trust that I'll ask for help when I need it. Trust that I'm capable of taking care of myself and making my own decisions about what I can and can't handle. I do trust you. Do you? Because 3 days ago, when we were at the grocery store and I was trying to reach something on a high shelf, you grabbed it for me before I could even ask. Last week, when we went to that new restaurant, you called ahead to make sure they had accessible seating without asking me if I wanted you to. Every single time we make plans, you check and double-check everything to make sure it'll work for me, and you never once ask if I want you to do that. Each example landed like a small stone, building into something heavier. Evan wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't because she was right. He had done all those things. He had been so focused on making everything smooth and easy that he hadn't stopped to consider whether she wanted smooth and easy or whether she wanted to navigate the world herself, bumps and all. I didn't realize, he said quietly. I know, that's the problem. You're so busy trying to protect me from the world that you don't see how that feels like you don't think I can handle the world. Lena's voice softened, and when Evan looked at her, he saw that her anger had transformed into something that looked like grief. I love you, Evan. God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me. But I can't be with someone who treats me like I'm constantly one moment away from breaking. I survived a car accident that should have killed me. I rebuilt my entire life from scratch. I learned to be strong again. And I need you to see that strength instead of just seeing what I lost. I do see your strength, Evan said, and his voice was raw now, stripped of everything but honesty. Lena, you're the strongest person I know. That's not a lie or something I'm saying to make you feel better. It's the truth. Then why can't you let me be strong around you? The question hit him like cold water, clarifying something he'd been too scared to examine. Evan sank down onto her couch, his legs suddenly unable to hold him, and put his head in his hands. Because if you're strong, he said slowly, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful, then you don't need me. And if you don't need me, then what's stopping you from leaving? The silence that followed was absolute. When Evan finally looked up, Lena was staring at him with an expression of such profound sadness that it hurt to see. "Oh, Evan," she whispered. "I lost Sarah," he continued, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "I lost her, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. She was here one moment, making pancakes and laughing at Theo's terrible joke, and then she was just gone. And I spent 2 years convinced that if I could just control everything, just protect everyone, just make sure nothing bad ever happened again, then I could keep Theo safe, keep myself safe. And then I met you, and you were so incredible and so vulnerable, and some broken part of my brain decided that if I could just take care of you, if I could just make your life easier, then you'd stay. Because who leaves someone who makes everything perfect for them?" "Evan, but that's not love, is it?" He laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "That's just me trying to buy your loyalty with helpfulness. That's me trying to make myself indispensable so you can't leave. And you're right to call me on it because you deserve better than someone who's trying to trap you with kindness." Lena wheeled closer until she was right in front of him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that he'd come to associate with safety and home. "I don't want to leave," she said softly. "That's what you're not understanding. I don't want to leave you or Theo or this thing we've built. But I need to know that you're with me because you want me, not because you need to save me. I need to know that if I have a bad day and I'm mean or frustrated or struggling, you're not going to see that as something you need to fix." "How do I do that?" Evan asked, looking up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "How do I stop trying to help when helping is how I show love?" "You learn the difference between helping because someone asks for it and helping because you're afraid." Lena reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs wiping away tears he hadn't realized were falling. "You learn to sit with discomfort instead of immediately trying to solve it. You learn to trust that I'm capable even when things are hard." "What if I can't? What if I'm too broken to love you the right way?" "Then we figure it out together. But Evan, I need you to hear me right now. I'm not asking you to stop caring. I'm not asking you to ignore when I'm struggling. I'm asking you to let me lead. Let me tell you what I need instead of assuming. Let me fail sometimes without immediately trying to catch me. Let me be a whole, complicated, sometimes messy person instead of a project that needs managing." Evan closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, feeling the weight of everything she was saying settle into his bones. She was asking him to trust her, but more than that, she was asking him to trust the universe not to take her away the way it had taken Sarah. And that was the hardest thing she could possibly ask. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Me too. I'm so scared, Evan, but I'm more scared of losing you because we couldn't figure out how to love each other right than I am of staying and working through this." He opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past his own fear to the woman in front of him. She was crying too, her mascara smudged, her eyes bright with tears, and something that might have been hope. "So we're not ending this?" he asked. "I don't want to end this, but we need to change it. We need to figure out how to build something that doesn't suffocate either of us." She pulled back slightly, her hands dropping to her lap. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, Evan, talking to my therapist about it, trying to understand why something that should feel so good sometimes feels so hard. And I realize that I've been so focused on not being a burden that I haven't been honest about what I need. And what I need is space to struggle, space to fail, space to figure things out myself, even when it would be easier to let you do it for me." "Because that's how you maintain your independence," Evan said slowly, understanding dawning. "Yes, my independence is everything to me. It's what I fought for in rehab, what I fight for every single day. And when you take that away, even with the best intentions, it feels like you're taking away the thing that makes me me." Evan nodded, wiping at his face with the back of his hand. "I get it. I do. But Lena, you need to understand something too. I'm not going to be perfect at this. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to want to help when you don't need it, because that's how my brain is wired. And I need you to tell me when I'm doing it, not wait 3 months and then blow up. Tell me in the moment so I can learn." "You're right," Lena said. "I should have said something sooner. I should have been clear about my boundaries instead of letting resentment build up. That's on me. So what do we do now?" Lena took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was steadier. "We start over. Not completely. I'm not throwing away 3 months of building something real. But we recalibrate. We figure out new patterns that work for both of us." "How?" For starters, you let me ask for help instead of offering it constantly. If I need something, I'll tell you. And if I don't ask, you assume I'm capable of handling it myself. That's going to be hard for me, Evan admitted. I know, but it's necessary for both of us. She reached for his hands, holding them in hers. And I promised to be more honest about my feelings before they turn into explosions. To tell you when something bothers me instead of storing it up until I can't take it anymore. What about Theo? Evan asked. He's attached to you. If we're recalibrating, he needs to understand too. We'll talk to him together. We'll explain that grown-ups sometimes need to adjust how they do things, that it doesn't mean anything's wrong, just that we're learning. Kids understand that. Evan looked down at their joined hands, his rougher and marked with work scars. Hers smaller but strong, capable of holding her entire body weight on a climbing wall. They were different in so many ways, broken in different places, scared of different things. But maybe that was okay. Maybe love wasn't about fixing each other's broken pieces, but about learning to fit together despite them. I love you, he said, looking up at her. I know I haven't said it out loud before, but I do. I love you, Lena. Not because you need saving or because I'm trying to fill some void Sarah left. I love you because you're funny and smart and you challenge me. Because you make Theo laugh. Because you taught me that it's okay to be scared as long as you don't let the fear stop you from living. Fresh tears spilled down Lena's cheeks, but she was smiling now, that real smile that transformed her entire face. I love you too. Even when you drive me crazy with your hovering, even when I want to scream because you're being too careful. I love you. So we're doing this? We're really trying to make this work? We're trying. No promises it'll be easy, no guarantees we won't mess up again. But we're trying. Evan pulled her into his arms, awkward with the geometry of the wheelchair between them, but determined to hold her anyway. She came willingly, her face pressed against his shoulder, her arms wrapped around his waist. They stayed like that for a long time, breathing together, letting the storm of the conversation settle into something calmer. I should go get Theo, Evan finally said, reluctantly pulling back. Rachel's expecting me to pick him up by 8. Okay, but Evan? Yeah? Tomorrow, can we have dinner? Just the 3 of us, and we can talk to Theo about what we discussed? Yeah, that sounds good. He stood to leave, but Lena caught his hand before he could move toward the door. Thank you, she said. For what? For staying, for listening, for not walking out when I told you I loved you and then immediately said we needed to change everything. Lena, I'm not going anywhere. I might mess this up 100 different ways, but I'm not running. That's a promise I can actually make. She squeezed his hand once more before letting go, and Evan walked to the door with his heart feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than it had in hours. In the doorway, he turned back to look at her, silhouetted against the window with the last rays of sunset painting her hair into living fire. One more thing, he said. What's that? Next time you're scared or upset or feeling like this is too hard, tell me before you decide to end things, because today took 10 years off my life, and I'd really like to avoid that if possible. Lena laughed, the sound watery but genuine. Deal. Now go get your kid and stop hovering in my doorway. That's me not hovering. I'm leaving, see? He took an exaggerated step backward into the hallway. Goodbye, Evan. Goodbye, Lena. He closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway for a moment, letting his racing heart slow down, letting the conversation replay in his mind. They'd almost ended tonight. They'd come so close to destroying something fragile and precious because neither of them knew how to love without fear getting in the way, but they hadn't ended. They'd fought and cried and been brutally honest, and somehow they'd come through the other side still together, still trying. His phone buzzed with a text. Lena, I'm proud of us. Evan, yeah? Lena, we could have run, either of us, but we stayed and did the hard work instead. Evan, does this mean I can stop panicking? Lena, for now. But fair warning, there will probably be more hard conversations. I'm complicated, remember? Evan, good. I'd be bored with easy. Lena, liar, you'd love easy. Evan, okay, you're right, I'd love easy, but I'll take complicated if it means I get you. Lena, smooth talker, now go. Theo's waiting. Evan drove to Rachel's house with the windows down despite the June chill, letting the cold air clear his head. His sister took one look at his face when she answered the door and pulled him into a hug without asking questions. "You okay?" she whispered. "Getting there," he whispered back. Theo came barreling out of the living room, his face sticky with what looked like chocolate ice cream, and launched himself at Evan's legs. "Dad, Aunt Rachel let me stay up past bedtime." "Did she now?" Evan shot his sister a look that promised retribution. "It's summer break," Rachel said defensively. "Rules are different in summer." On the drive home, Theo chattered about his evening, about the movie he'd watched and the games he'd played, and how Aunt Rachel's new boyfriend was teaching him to play chess. Evan made appropriate responses, but his mind was still back in Lena's apartment, still processing everything that had been said. "Dad?" Theo asked as they pulled into their driveway. "Is everything okay with Lena?" Evan turned off the engine and twisted in his seat to look at his son. In the dim light from the porch, Theo looked older than 8, his eyes serious and knowing. "Why do you ask?" "Because you look sad, the same way you looked sad when Mom died." The observation hit Evan harder than it should have. He'd thought he'd been hiding his emotions better, protecting Theo from the adult complexities of relationships and fear, and learning how to love again. "Lena and I had a hard conversation tonight," Evan said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "We had to talk about some stuff that was bothering both of us, but we worked it out and everything's okay now." "You promise?" "I promise. And tomorrow Lena's coming for dinner, and we're all going to talk together about some things, okay?" Theo studied his father's face with that unsettling intensity that reminded Evan so much of Sarah. Finally, he nodded. "Okay. But Dad?" "Yeah, buddy? If Lena makes you sad, you should tell her, because holding sad inside makes it bigger." Evan pulled his son into a hug, breathing in the smell of chocolate and kid sweat and the indefinable something that was uniquely Theo. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't always notice." Later, after Theo was tucked in and the house was quiet, Evan sat on the back porch with a beer he wasn't really drinking and let himself feel the full weight of the day. They'd almost lost everything tonight. One more push, one more accusation, one wrong word, and Lena would have walked away convinced he could never give her what she needed. And he would have let her go, convinced he was too broken to love anyone right. But they hadn't. They'd stayed. They'd fought for each other even when it was hard, even when walking away would have been easier. And maybe that was what love really was. Not the easy moments, not the perfect dates, or the sweet texts, or the comfortable silences. Love was staying when every instinct screamed to run. Love was fighting for something even when you weren't sure you'd win. His phone lit up with one more message. "Lena, thank you for today, for all of it, even the hard parts. Evan, especially the hard parts. That's when we figured out we were worth fighting for." Lena, "Yes, exactly that. Good night, Evan. I love you." Evan, "I love you too. Sleep well." Evan sat there until his beer went warm and the stars came out in full force, until the night air turned cold enough that he had to go inside. And when he finally climbed into bed, he didn't dream of loss or endings. He dreamed of Lena's laugh, of Theo's smile, of a future that was uncertain and scary and absolutely worth fighting for. The months that followed their confrontation transformed in ways Evan hadn't expected. It wasn't a smooth transformation, wasn't some magical shift where suddenly everything was easy. Instead, it was awkward and fumbling, full of moments where Evan had to physically stop himself from reaching out to help, full of times when Lena had to force herself to ask for what she needed instead of suffering in stubborn silence. They stumbled. They argued. They learned. Summer bloomed into full force across Boulder, turning the foothills golden and the climbing gym into a second home for all three of them. Theo shot up 2 inches seemingly overnight and lost his first tooth during a particularly enthusiastic celebration when Lena completed her project route. The tooth fairy left $5 and a note congratulating him on his bravery, and Theo kept both the money and the note in a special box by his bed. In August, Lena met Evan's parents via video call, his mom in Florida, his dad remarried and living in Oregon, and navigated their careful questions about her work and her life with a grace that made Evan fall even deeper in love with her. His mother cried after the call ended, and when Evan asked why, she'd said, "Because you're smiling again, sweetheart. Really smiling, not just pretending for Theo's sake." By September, when the Aspens started their annual transformation into living gold, they'd settled into something that felt less like a relationship and more like a partnership. Lena kept a toothbrush at Evan's house. Theo had his own shelf at Lena's apartment for his Legos. They had inside jokes and comfortable silences and the kind of shorthand that came from actually knowing each other, not just the highlight reels people showed the world. But underneath the comfortable routine, Evan had been planning something that terrified him more than any conversation they'd had. He'd been planning it since July, when Lena had fallen asleep on his couch with her head in his lap and Theo curled against her side. And Evan had looked at the two of them and thought with crystalline clarity that this was his family. This was what he wanted for the rest of his life. The ring had taken him 3 weeks to find, visiting every jeweler in Boulder County until he'd discovered a small shop in Longmont run by a woman who designed custom pieces. He'd described Lena, her strength, her stubbornness, her copper hair and green eyes, and the jeweler had created something perfect. A platinum band with a small emerald flanked by 2 diamonds, elegant and understated, the kind of ring that could handle climbing walls in daily life without getting in the way. The hard part hadn't been finding the ring. The hard part had been figuring out how to propose to someone who needed her independence like oxygen, how to ask her to build a life together without making it feel like he was trying to control or constrain her. "You're overthinking this," Rachel had said when he'd called her in a panic 2 weeks before he'd planned to propose. "Lena loves you. She's not going to think you're trying to trap her by asking her to marry you." "But what if she's not ready? What if she thinks I'm moving too fast? What if—" "Evan, stop. You've been together 9 months. You're not rushing anything. And more importantly, you've both already done the hard work of figuring out how to love each other right. The proposal is just making official what you've already built." "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't always listen." So on a Saturday in late September, Evan loaded Theo and a picnic basket into his truck and drove to Lena's apartment with his heart in his throat and the ring box burning a hole in his pocket. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater the color of autumn leaves, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Evan forgot for a moment how to speak. "You okay?" she asked, laughing at his expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "You're beautiful, sir," he managed, and she rolled her eyes even as she blushed. "Where are we going?" Theo demanded, pushing past both of them. "Dad won't tell me anything except to pack my emergency Legos." "Emergency Legos?" Lena raised an eyebrow at Evan. "Don't ask. It's a whole thing." They drove west into the mountains, taking the winding road up Boulder Canyon until they reached a turnoff Evan had scouted 3 times to make sure it was accessible. The trail to the meadow was paved, part of the county's recent push for inclusive recreation, and wide enough for Lena's chair to navigate easily. "Where are we going?" Lena asked as they started up the path, Theo running ahead to examine interesting rocks and terrified squirrels. "You'll see," Evan said, and his voice must have betrayed something because she gave him a searching look. "Evan Mercer, what are you up to?" "Nothing. Can a guy take his girlfriend and his kid on a nice hike without an interrogation?" "Not when the guy in question has been weird all week. You've been distracted and jumpy, and you nearly cut your thumb off on Tuesday because you weren't paying attention to what you were doing." "I'm fine. We're almost there." The meadow opened up before them like something from a painting, a natural amphitheater surrounded by aspens blazing gold against an impossibly blue sky. Wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season, purple asters and yellow rabbitbrush, and the last defiant stands of Indian paintbrush. A small creek burbled along one edge, and the whole place felt separate from the world, like they'd stepped into a pocket of peace. "Oh," Lena breathed, stopping at the meadow's edge. "Evan, this is gorgeous." "Theo, buddy," Evan called to his son, who was attempting to befriend a chipmunk. "Come help me set up the picnic." They spread a blanket in the center of the meadow, weighting down the corners with rocks Theo selected with great care. Evan unpacked the basket, sandwiches from Lena's favorite deli, fruit salad, chocolate chip cookies that Theo had helped make, and which were slightly burned on the bottom, but perfect anyway. They ate in the warm September sun, Theo narrating an elaborate story about the chipmunk he'd met, who was apparently the mayor of Chipmunk City and had very strong opinions about property taxes. After lunch, Theo announced he was going exploring and took off toward the creek with instructions to stay in sight and not fall in, which left Evan and Lena alone in the middle of the meadow, the aspens whispering overhead, the sun warm on their faces. "This was really thoughtful," Lena said, lying back on the blanket and closing her eyes. "I needed this. Work's been insane lately." "I know, that's why I planned it." Evan lay down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you happy?" She opened her eyes and turned her head to look at him. "That's a strange question. Of course I'm happy. Why?" "I mean really happy. With us, with how things are. Not just settling because I'm convenient or because Theo's sweet or because you've convinced yourself this is good enough." Lena propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "Where is this coming from?" "I just need to know. Because I'm about to do something terrifying and I need to know you're as sure about us as I am." "Evan, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He sat up, his heart hammering so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. In the distance, Theo was building something elaborate out of creek stones, completely absorbed in his task. The aspens continued their gentle whisper. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals in lazy spirals. 9 months ago, Evan started, his voice rough, I walked into a cafe expecting a disaster. And it was a disaster at first. You cried, I had no idea what was happening, and we both had every reason to walk away and never see each other again. But we didn't, Lena said softly. But we didn't. And instead we built something that terrifies me and heals me and makes me believe in things I thought I'd lost forever. You taught Theo how to laugh again. You taught me that it's okay to be scared as long as you don't let fear make your decisions. You showed me that love isn't about fixing people's broken pieces. It's about loving them because of those pieces, not despite them. Tears were building in Lena's eyes, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. I know I'm not perfect, Evan continued, reaching into his pocket with shaking hands. I know I still hover sometimes, that I still worry too much, that I'm probably always going to want to protect you even when you don't need protecting. But I'm learning, I'm trying, and I want to keep trying for the rest of my life if you'll let me. He pulled out the ring box and opened it, the emerald catching the sunlight and throwing green fire across the blanket. Lena made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, her hands shaking as much as his. Lena Hart, Evan said, his voice breaking slightly, you rebuilt your life after it was destroyed. You learned to be strong in ways most people can't imagine. You fight every single day to be seen as whole, as capable, as someone who doesn't need to be saved. And I see all of that. I see your strength and your stubbornness and your fierce independence, and I love you not because you need me, but because you choose me anyway. Evan, she whispered, I'm not asking you to complete me or fix me or make me whole. I'm already whole, just like you are. But I'm asking you to build a life with me, to keep teaching me how to love you right, to let me be there for the good days and the bad days and all the messy, complicated days in between. I'm asking you to marry me, Lena. Not because you need a husband, but because I need you as my wife. Because Theo needs you as his mom. Because we're better together than we are apart. Tears were streaming down Lena's face now, and Evan's vision was blurring too. In the distance, Theo had abandoned his stone construction and was watching them with wide eyes, bouncing slightly on his toes like he was physically restraining himself from running over. Say something, Evan said, his voice barely audible. Please, Lena, say something. She reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle and sure. You beautiful, frustrating, wonderful man. Did you really think I'd say anything except yes? The relief that flooded through Evan was so intense it was almost painful. That's a yes? You're saying yes? I'm saying yes. 1,000 times yes. 1,000,000 times yes. Yes to building a life together. Yes to being Theo's mom. Yes to all the messy, complicated days. Yes to everything. Evan pulled the ring from the box with trembling fingers and slid it onto her hand. It fit perfectly, the emerald glowing against her skin like it had been made specifically for her, which, of course, it had been. Can I kiss you now? Evan asked. You better, Lena laughed through her tears. And he did, pulling her close and kissing her like they had all the time in the world, because they did. They had the rest of their lives. A whoop shattered the moment, and suddenly Theo was barreling toward them, his face split in the biggest grin Evan had seen since before Sarah died. "Does this mean Lena's going to be my real mom now?" Theo demanded, launching himself at them both. "If that's okay with you," Lena said, wrapping one arm around the boy while keeping the other around Evan. "Your dad was your mom first, and she'll always be your mom. But if you want, I could be your mom too. You can never have too many people who love you. Can I call you Mom? You can call me whatever feels right to you. Mom, Lena, hey you. I'll answer to anything as long as you keep being the amazing kid you are." Theo buried his face in her shoulder, and Evan saw his small shoulders shaking. When the boy finally looked up, his face was wet with tears, but he was still smiling. "I prayed for this," Theo said softly. "Every night since I met you, I prayed that you wouldn't leave and that you'd be my mom. And now you're going to be my mom for real." Lena pulled him closer, and Evan wrapped his arms around both of them, this small family they'd built from broken pieces and honest conversations and the courage to keep trying even when it was hard. They stayed like that for a long time, tangled together in the September sun, while the aspens whispered approval and the creek sang, and somewhere overhead a hawk cried out like a benediction. Later, after they'd packed up the picnic and started back down the trail, Theo ran ahead again, this time shouting to every tree and rock about how his dad proposed and how Lena said yes, and how they were going to be a real family now. Lena and Evan followed at a slower pace, her hand in his, the ring catching light every time she moved. "I have a question," Lena said. "Shoot." "When did you buy the ring?" "July. Right after you fell asleep on my couch, and I realized I wanted every day to be like that." "July? Evan, that was 2 months ago. Why did you wait?" He was quiet for a moment, watching Theo cartwheel through fallen aspen leaves with complete abandon. "Because I needed to be sure I was doing this for the right reasons, that I wasn't asking because I was scared of losing you, or because I wanted to lock you down, or because I was trying to replace Sarah. I needed to know I was asking because I genuinely wanted to spend the rest of my life with you, not because I was afraid of being alone." "And what did you decide?" "That I love you. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of you, not the way you make me feel less broken. I love you, your stubbornness and your strength, and the way you call me on my shit. I love how you challenge me and push me and refuse to let me treat you like you're fragile. I love that you taught my son how to hope again. I love all of it, and I want all of it forever." Lena stopped walking and pulled him around to face her. "Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you in that cafe? That I was a terrible blind date setup? Besides that, I thought you looked sad, like someone who'd forgotten how to be happy. And I remember thinking that I knew exactly what that felt like, and I wondered if maybe two sad people could figure out how to be happy together." She smiled, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. "Turns out we could. We did. And now we get to keep doing it for the rest of our lives. No pressure or anything. All the pressure? I have high expectations, Mercer. Think you can handle it? I guess we'll find out." They made it back to the truck as the sun started its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that looked like they'd been designed specifically for this moment. Theo fell asleep in the back seat on the drive home, exhausted from excitement and creek exploration and the sheer emotional weight of the day. "What do we tell people?" Lena asked quietly, her hand still in Evan's on the console between them. "When did we want to get married? What do you want? I don't need a big wedding. I don't need months of planning and hundreds of guests and a dress that costs more than my car. I just need you and Theo and maybe a handful of people who love us." "That sounds perfect. When?" She was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. "December, before the year ends, before anything else can happen to try to stop us." Evan understood the fear beneath those words, the superstition that had grown from too much loss. "December it is. Do you have a place in mind?" "There's a botanical garden south of Denver. They have a greenhouse that stays open through winter. It's all glass and plants, and it's wheelchair accessible, and it's beautiful. I went there once after the accident when I was feeling particularly sorry for myself, and I remember thinking that if I ever got married again, which I was convinced would never happen, I'd want it to be somewhere that proved beautiful things could survive even in the coldest seasons. Then that's where we'll do it. Glass and plants and proof that beautiful things survive. They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, Theo snoring softly in the back, the ring on Lena's finger catching streetlight as they passed under sodium lamps. When they pulled up to Lena's apartment, she didn't immediately get out. "Can I tell you something?" she asked.
Always. I'm terrified. Of what? Of this being too good. Of the universe deciding we've had enough happiness and taking it away. Of something happening to you or Theo or my health failing or any of the 1,000 things that could destroy what we've built. Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. I lost everything once, Evan. My career, my body, my relationship, my entire sense of self. And I survived it, and I rebuilt, and I'm stronger now. But I don't know if I could survive losing you, losing this. Evan brought her hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles just below the ring. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. Life is unpredictable and scary and sometimes cruel. But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together. Not me protecting you or you fighting alone, but us as a team, as partners, as a family. You promise? I promise. For better or worse, in sickness and health, in all the messy, complicated, scary, beautiful moments, I'm not going anywhere. She leaned across the console and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. I love you, Evan Mercer. Even when you're hovering, even when you drive me crazy. I love you. I love you too. Now go inside and get some sleep. We have a wedding to plan. Just a small one, she reminded him. The smallest. Just us and Theo and a handful of people in a greenhouse in December, proving that beautiful things survive. After she'd gone inside, Evan sat in the truck for a long moment, listening to Theo's steady breathing and watching the light come on in Lena's apartment. His phone buzzed. Lena, thank you for today, for all of it, for asking, and for meaning it. Evan, thank you for saying yes, for trusting me with your heart even though I'm still learning how to hold it right. Lena, you're doing better than you think. Good night, future husband. Evan, good night, future wife. He drove home with Theo still asleep in the back, carried his son into the house, and tucked him into bed without waking him. Alone in his own room, Evan pulled out his phone and stared at Sarah's picture on his bedside table, the last one taken before she died, her smile bright and careless, her arm around a 5-year-old Theo. I hope this is okay, he whispered to the photo. I hope you'd approve. I hope you know I'll never forget you, but I also can't keep living in the past. Theo needs a mom, and I need a partner, and Lena is both of those things. She's not replacing you. She's just helping us learn how to be whole again. The photo didn't answer, of course, but in the silence of his room, Evan felt something shift, some weight he'd been carrying since that terrible Tuesday morning finally beginning to lift. He was allowed to be happy. He was allowed to love again. He was allowed to build a new life without betraying the old one. His phone buzzed one more time. Lena, are you awake? Evan, yeah, can't sleep, too much adrenaline. Lena, me too. Keep thinking about December, about becoming a family for real. Evan, we're already a family. December just makes it official. Lena, true. But Evan? Evan, yeah? Lena, I can't wait to marry you. I can't wait to wake up every morning and know you're mine and I'm yours. And we chose this. We chose each other. Evan, best choice I ever made? Lena, best choice we both made. Now, go to sleep. We have forever to be excited about this, but you have work in the morning. Evan, yes, ma'am. Sweet dreams, fiancé. Lena, sweet dreams, fiancé. Evan finally fell asleep with his phone still in his hand and a smile on his face. And when he dreamed, it was of greenhouses in winter and copper hair catching light and a small family choosing each other over and over again. In the morning, he'd tell Rachel, who would cry and immediately start planning things despite his protests. He'd tell his parents, who would be thrilled. He'd tell Marcus at the climbing gym, and his work crew, and anyone who'd listen because he wanted the world to know that he'd found something precious and rare and worth fighting for. But for now, in the quiet darkness of his room with Theo sleeping soundly down the hall, and Lena wearing his ring across town, Evan let himself simply be happy. Not cautiously happy or guardedly happy or happy with asterisks and conditions. Just happy. Pure and simple and absolutely terrified and completely certain all at once. They were getting married. He and Lena Hart, the woman who'd cried at their first meeting and challenged everything he thought he knew about love and strength and what it meant to be whole. They were building a family, him and Theo and Lena, and it wasn't perfect and it wouldn't always be easy, but it was theirs. And that was more than enough.
December arrived with the kind of crystalline cold that made Boulder feel like it existed inside a snow globe, all sharp edges and brilliant light. The botanical garden south of Denver looked like something from a fairy tale, the greenhouse rising from the frozen landscape like a promise that spring would eventually return. Inside, warmth and green things thrived despite the winter pressing against the glass. And it was here, on the 15th of December, that Evan Mercer watched his son walk beside Lena Hart down an aisle lined with winter jasmine and white roses. The ceremony was small, just as they'd wanted. Rachel stood beside Evan as his best woman, crying before Lena had even appeared. Lena's friend Amber was there, the one who'd inadvertently set this whole thing in motion, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Marcus from the climbing gym had come, along with a handful of Evan's work crew and some of Lena's colleagues from her environmental consulting firm. Evan's parents had flown in, his mother already weeping openly, his father's hand steady on her shoulder. Even Lena's physical therapist had come, the woman who'd first suggested adaptive climbing all those years ago. But Evan barely registered any of them. His entire world had narrowed to the woman moving toward him with his son at her side. Lena wore a simple ivory dress that fell to her ankles, the fabric draped in a way that was both elegant and practical, designed specifically to work with her wheelchair. Her copper hair was loose, falling in waves around her shoulders, with small white flowers woven through like stars. She wasn't wearing much makeup, just enough to highlight those impossible green eyes that had captured him from the very first night. In her lap, she held a bouquet of winter berries and evergreen, bold splashes of red against the white. But it was Theo who made Evan's throat close up completely. His son wore a miniature version of Evan's gray suit, his dark curls freshly cut, his small hand resting on Lena's arm like a vow. The boy's face was solemn with the weight of his responsibility, but his eyes were bright with joy. When they reached the front, Theo looked up at Evan and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I got her here, Dad. I didn't mess up." The small gathering laughed, the sound warm and fond, and Lena reached down to squeeze Theo's hand before he went to stand beside Rachel. The officiant was a woman Lena had found, someone who specialized in meaningful ceremonies and who'd spent an hour on the phone with both of them understanding their story. She smiled at them now, her eyes kind, and began. "We're gathered here today not to witness the beginning of Evan and Lena's love story, but to celebrate its continuation. Their story didn't start here, in this beautiful greenhouse, or even on that first disastrous blind date that somehow turned into something extraordinary. Their story started in the moments of grief and loss that brought them both to the edge of giving up. And it continued in the courage they found to try again, to be vulnerable, to choose hope over fear." Evan felt Lena's hand find his, her grip strong and sure. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the woman he was about to marry, but every version of her he'd come to know over these months. The woman who'd broken down in a cafe. The woman who'd climbed walls with nothing but her arms and her determination. The woman who'd challenged him when he tried to make her small and safe. The woman who'd looked at his broken places and said, "Me too." "Evan and Lena have chosen to write their own vows," the officiant continued. "Evan, would you like to begin?" Evan cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket for the note cards he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. But when he looked at Lena's face, at the way she was watching him with her whole heart visible in her eyes, he tucked the cards away again. "I had a whole speech prepared," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Something about how you saved me, how you brought light back into my life, how you taught Theo and me how to hope again. And all of that's true. But standing here now, looking at you, I realize that's not the whole story." He took a breath, aware that everyone was watching, but unable to care about anything except the woman in front of him. You didn't save me, Lena. You met me in my brokenness, and you didn't try to fix it. You just sat with me in it and said, "Yeah, this is hard, isn't it?" You challenged me when I tried to hover. You called me out when I treated you like something fragile. You demanded that I see you as strong, as capable, as whole, even when that was harder for me than just protecting you would have been. Lena's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. You taught me that love isn't about rescuing someone or being rescued. It's about standing beside each other and saying, "I see who you really are, and I choose you anyway." It's about being honest even when it's hard. It's about fighting for each other instead of with each other. And it's about building something together that's stronger than anything we could build alone. He squeezed her hands, feeling his own tears threatening. I promise to keep learning how to love you the way you need to be loved. I promise to ask before I help and to trust your answers. I promise to see your strength even on days when you can't see it yourself. I promise to be your partner, not your protector. Your equal, not your savior. And I promise to build a life with you where we choose each other every single day for the rest of our lives. The greenhouse was absolutely silent, except for the sound of sniffling from approximately everyone in attendance. Even Rachel had given up on discretion and was openly sobbing. "Lena?" the officiant said gently. Lena took a shaky breath, and Evan watched her gather herself, that familiar determination settling over her features. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "Evan Mercer, you infuriating, wonderful, completely unexpected man. When I rolled into that cafe 9 months ago, I was so tired. Tired of being hurt. Tired of being seen as less than. Tired of having to prove I was worthy of love. I'd convinced myself I was done trying, that I'd rather be alone than go through one more relationship where someone left because things got too hard or too complicated or too real." She smiled through her tears, and Evan felt his heart expand in his chest. "And then you knelt beside me. Not above me, not in front of me, but beside me. And you asked if you could stay, but only if I wanted you to. You gave me choice and agency and control in a moment when I felt like I had none, and you've been doing that ever since." Her voice caught slightly, and she paused to collect herself. "I'm not going to lie and say this has been easy. We've fought. We've cried. We've had to learn how to communicate through our fears and our baggage and all the ways we've been hurt before. But you never gave up on us, Evan. Even when I told you I was falling in love with you and then immediately said we needed to change everything, you stayed. You listened. You worked with me to build something that honored both of our needs." She glanced at Theo, who was watching with rapt attention, and her smile widened. "You gave me a son, this beautiful, brave, honest boy who asks me questions about my wheelchair with no shame or pity, who tells me when I'm being grumpy, who falls asleep on my lap during movies and trusts me to keep him safe. You gave me a family when I'd convinced myself I'd never have one." Now it was Evan's turn to fight back tears, his vision blurring as Lena continued. "So I promise to keep being honest with you, even when it's uncomfortable. I promise to tell you when I need help and when I need space to figure things out myself. I promise to trust you with my heart, even though hearts are fragile and scary and can be broken. I promise to love Theo like he's mine, because he is, and to honor the mother he lost while also being the mother he needs now. And I promise to choose you every single day, even on the days when choosing you is hard, even on the days when my body doesn't cooperate or my fear gets loud or I forget why we're doing this. I choose you, Evan, today and always." The officiant had to take a moment to compose herself before continuing. "The rings?" Theo stepped forward importantly, carrying a small pillow that Rachel had made, and presented it to the officiant with great ceremony. The rings were simple, matching platinum bands that would hold up to the physical demands of their lives. "These rings are symbols of the promises you've made today," the officiant said. "Circles with no beginning and no end, representing the continuity of your love. Evan, please place this ring on Lena's finger." Evan took Lena's left hand, the one already wearing the engagement ring, and slid the wedding band into place beside it. "With this ring, I choose you, today and always." "Lena, please place this ring on Evan's finger." Lena's hand shook slightly as she took the ring, but her voice was steady when she said, "With this ring, I choose you, today and always."
By the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, and by the power of the love witnessed here today, I now pronounce you married. Evan, you may kiss your wife." Evan leaned down, cupping Lena's face gently in his hands, and kissed her with everything he had, all the fear and hope and love and promise of the past 9 months distilled into a single moment. Around them, their small gathering erupted in applause and cheers, but Evan barely heard it. His entire world was the woman in his arms, the way she kissed him back with equal intensity, the way her hands gripped his shoulders like she'd never let go. When they finally broke apart, Theo was already climbing onto Lena's lap, wrapping his arms around both of them in the awkward 3-person hug they'd perfected over the past months. "You're my mom now," Theo said, his voice muffled against Lena's shoulder. "For real, forever." "For real," Lena agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "Forever." The reception was held in the same greenhouse, tables set up among the winter blooms, string lights casting everything in a warm glow. There was music from a small quartet, simple food that everyone loved, and enough champagne that Rachel's speech got progressively more emotional and less coherent as the evening went on. But the moment Evan would remember forever came later, after the cake had been cut and the toasts had been made and most of the guests had left. The sun had set completely, and the greenhouse glowed like a lantern in the darkness, full of warmth and life and growing things. Theo had fallen asleep in a chair pushed against the wall, his small body curled up like a question mark, his suit jacket draped over him like a blanket. Evan and Lena sat together at one of the empty tables, her wheelchair pulled close to his chair, their hands intertwined on the white tablecloth. They were quiet, exhausted in the best possible way, watching their son sleep and letting the reality of what they'd done settle into their bones. "Mrs. Mercer," Evan said softly, testing the name. "I'm keeping Hart professionally," Lena reminded him, "but I like the way you say it anyway." "Mrs. Hart Mercer?" "Better, though that's a mouthful." "We'll workshop it." They were quiet again, comfortable in the silence. Outside, snow had started falling, soft flakes drifting past the glass like blessings. Inside, plants that should have been dormant continued to bloom, proof that beautiful things could survive even in the coldest seasons. "Can I tell you something?" Lena asked, her thumb tracing patterns on the back of Evan's hand. "Always." "When I was in rehab, right after the accident, there was this moment when I realized my old life was completely gone. My career as I'd known it, my relationship, my identity as someone who could just move through the world without thinking about it. Everything was gone, and I had to rebuild from nothing." She paused, and Evan waited, knowing she'd continue when she was ready. "And I remember thinking that I would never be happy again, that the best I could hope for was some kind of tolerable existence where I learned to cope with what I'd lost. I couldn't imagine ever feeling joy again, ever falling in love again, ever having a family. Those things seemed like they belonged to the person I used to be, not the person I was becoming." "But," Evan prompted gently. "But I was wrong. So completely wrong." She turned to look at him, and in the soft light of the greenhouse, she looked radiant. "I'm happier now than I ever was before the accident. Not because the accident was good, or because I'm glad it happened. I'm not. But because it forced me to figure out who I really was underneath all the things I thought defined me. And that person, the real me, is stronger and braver and more honest than the person I was before." "I love that person," Evan said. "I know you do. That's the miracle, Evan. You love me not despite my wheelchair or my limitations or my complicated relationship with my own body. You love me because of all the things that make me me. And you gave me a son who does the same thing, who looks at my chair and says, 'Cool, can you do wheelies?' instead of 'I'm sorry.'" Evan laughed softly, glancing at Theo's sleeping form. "He asked you that on your second meeting. And I did do wheelies, if you recall. Nearly took out your coffee table." "Worth it." They sat in comfortable silence for another moment before Lena spoke again, her voice soft and wondering. "I used to think I was broken, Evan. That the accident had broken me in ways that could never be fixed. But sitting here now, married to you, with that beautiful boy sleeping over there who calls me Mom, I realize I was never broken. I was just changed, and change isn't the same as broken." "No," Evan agreed. It's not. You were changed too. By losing Sarah, by becoming a single parent, by all the ways grief reshaped you. But you're not broken either. We're just two changed people who found each other. And who chose each other, Lena added. That's the important part. We chose this. We chose each other. We chose to build something new out of all our changed pieces. Evan brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles where the rings gleamed in the soft light. Best choice I ever made. Me too. At the wall, Theo stirred and opened his eyes, blinking in confusion before remembering where he was. When he saw Evan and Lena watching him, he smiled, that wide, guileless smile of childhood that held nothing back. Are we a family now? He asked, his voice still rough with sleep. We were always a family, Lena said. But yes, now it's official. Can we go home? Yeah, buddy, Evan said. Let's go home. They gathered their things slowly, in no rush, saying goodbye to the few remaining staff members and thanking them for making the day perfect. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily now, coating Evan's truck in white. He helped Lena transfer to the passenger seat while Theo climbed into the back, and then collapsed her wheelchair and loaded it into the bed. The drive back to Boulder was quiet, Theo falling back asleep almost immediately, Lena watching the snow fall through the windshield with a peaceful expression. They decided that Lena would move into Evan's house. It was bigger, had a yard for Theo, and with some modifications would work better than her apartment. They'd spent the past month making it accessible, widening doorways and installing ramps and making sure Lena could navigate every room with ease. When they pulled into the driveway, the house looked different somehow. Same structure, same porch, same windows glowing warm in the darkness. But different because now it held a family instead of just two people trying to survive. Evan carried Theo inside and up to bed, the boy murmuring sleepy protests about wanting to stay up but not fighting when Evan tucked him in. By the time Evan came back downstairs, Lena had transferred from her chair to the couch, her dress pooled around her like water, her hair loose and slightly messy from the long day. Come here, she said, patting the cushion beside her. Evan sat, and immediately Lena curled against him, her head on his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just breathing together in the quiet house. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Boulder in white, making everything clean and new. Evan? Lena finally said, her voice soft in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For staying. That first night in the cafe when I was crying and broken and giving you every reason to run. You stayed. And you've kept staying through every hard conversation, every moment of doubt, every time I pushed you away because I was scared. You stayed. Evan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the flowers that had been in her hair. Where else would I go? You're my home now, Lena. You and Theo. This house is just a building, but the three of us together, that's home. She tilted her head up to look at him, and even in the dim light, he could see tears shining in her eyes again. I love you, Evan Mercer. My husband, my partner, my home. I love you too, Lena Hart Mercer. My wife, my equal, my miracle. They kissed again, slower this time, a promise rather than a celebration. When they finally pulled apart, Lena smiled and said, Take me to bed, husband. I'm exhausted, and we have the rest of our lives to stay up late. Evan carried her upstairs, navigating the now familiar route to their bedroom. The master bedroom he'd once shared with Sarah, but which he'd completely redecorated with Lena, making it theirs. He helped her out of her dress and into comfortable clothes, the intimacy of the act both practical and profound. She transferred to the bed while he changed, and then they were under the covers together, her body curled against his, their hands intertwined between them. Happy? Evan asked. Deliriously, Lena murmured, already half asleep. Scared and happy and so grateful I could burst. That's a lot of feelings. I'm a complicated person. You married me anyway. Best decision I ever made, Evan said, echoing the words that had become their shorthand for choosing each other. Me too, Lena whispered. Best decision, best life, best family. She fell asleep first, her breathing evening out into the steady rhythm that told Evan she was truly at peace.
He lay awake a little longer, listening to the sounds of his family. Lena's soft breathing, Theo's occasional sleep murmur from down the hall, the house settling around them like a satisfied sigh. His phone buzzed softly on the nightstand, and he carefully reached for it, trying not to disturb Lena. A text from Rachel. Rachel, I know you're probably asleep, or busy, in which case gross, but I just wanted to say congratulations again. You deserve this, Ev. You deserve to be happy. Sarah would be so proud of you. Evan stared at the message for a long time, feeling something in his chest that might have been grief or gratitude or some complicated mixture of both. He'd spent so long feeling guilty for moving on, for finding happiness after Sarah, for building a new life that didn't include her. But sitting here now, with Lena sleeping peacefully beside him and Theo safe down the hall, he realized that Sarah wouldn't have wanted him to stay frozen in that terrible Tuesday morning forever. She would have wanted him to live, to love again, to give Theo a mother and himself a partner and all of them a chance at happiness. Evan, thank you for everything, for forcing me to go on that blind date, for supporting us, for loving Lena like family even though you barely knew her. I couldn't have done this without you. Rachel, yes, you could have, but I'm glad I got to be part of it. Now go to sleep and let me imagine you and your beautiful wife are doing something more interesting than texting your sister. Evan, good night, Rachel. Love you. Rachel, love you too, big brother. Congratulations on your happily ever after. You earned it. Evan set his phone back on the nightstand and settled more comfortably into the pillows, his arm tightening slightly around Lena. She murmured something in her sleep and pressed closer, and Evan felt a wave of contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was his life now, this beautiful, complicated, sometimes difficult, but always worth it life. A wife who challenged him and loved him and refused to let him make her small. A son who was finally learning to hope again, who slept through most nights now without nightmares, who had two mothers to love him, one watching from whatever came after, one here beside them building a future. A family that had been forged from loss and grief and the courage to try again. It wasn't perfect. There would be hard days ahead, days when Lena's body didn't cooperate, when Theo struggled with missing Sarah, when Evan fell back into old patterns of hovering and protecting. There would be arguments and misunderstandings and moments when the fear got loud enough to drown out everything else. But they would face those days together, not as broken people trying to fix each other, but as whole people choosing to build something stronger than anything they could build alone. Evan closed his eyes and let himself drift towards sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow he'd wake up beside his wife, that they'd make breakfast together while Theo narrated the political drama of Lego City, that they'd spend the day as a family doing ordinary things that felt miraculous because they'd almost not had them at all. He'd spent 2 years convinced that happiness was something that belonged to his past, something that had died with Sarah on that terrible morning. But he'd been wrong. Happiness wasn't something you lost and never found again. It was something you built day by day, choice by choice, with the people brave enough to build it with you. And as snow continued to fall outside their window and warmth surrounded them inside, Evan Mercer fell asleep believing, truly believing, that they were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to be happy. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but genuinely, deeply, extraordinarily happy. The story that had begun with tears in a small cafe ended here, in a warm bed in a house full of love, with a family that had chosen each other over and over until choosing became as natural as breathing. A single dad who'd been tricked into a blind date. A woman in a wheelchair who'd convinced herself she was too broken to be loved. A boy who needed hope. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, they'd found their way to each other and built something beautiful from all their broken pieces. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, a family slept. And somewhere in the space between, 3 hearts beat in quiet synchrony, strong and steady and sure, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it together, always together, forever.